Hello and welcome, Daniel, and welcome viewers to another edition of Thinking Bitcoin. And in this episode, Daniel and I are going to respond to a recent article by Mr. Denton about Daniel's character, the Emperor of Bitcoin. Take it away, Daniel.
Well, thank you. First of all, this piece could be like the perfect publicity piece for me, and it just came out recently. And as far as I can tell, Daniel Dalton, the writer, is quite serious in what he says. And so in this article, he says that I am irrelevant and failing to produce meaningful discussion. And he kind of it is just the perfect promotional article for my character, the Emperor of Bitcoin.
I think it's a good article because there are a number of points that Mr. Denton makes that are really worth addressing in detail, because one of the challenges that's clear is to differentiate between a persona character and the creator behind it. So having the opportunity to clarify some of the messages that both you, Daniel, are trying to get across, and Emperor Daniel are also trying to get across in different formats with different strategies and tools is a worthwhile exercise.
Well, I would say that the Emperor of Bitcoin also pretends to be an insane person who thinks he's the Emperor of Bitcoin on Twitter. So I am still playing the Emperor of Bitcoin now. It's just that you know that I really am the Emperor of Bitcoin, so I just act normal with you.
Of course, right? And I am the crazy cat lady goddess of Bitcoin, so I can totally be cool with my persona here as well. But I do, in all seriousness, want to say that one of the things that struck me about the article that was really interesting was the paragraph early on where what he discusses is the language around users, right? Users and the core development team, and really doesn't understand clearly what it is that you are trying to say. And that's an opportunity to clarify.
Well, first of all, I'd like to just mention a few things that sound like innuendos in the article, where he says something in a very suggestive way that almost sounds like he could be on my side and that he's trolling.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to go over those first because I think those will be more fun.
Okay, cool.
So early in the article, he says, unfortunately, it is evident that Krawitz's ramblings as the Emperor of Bitcoin is doing little to solve the issues he's mentioning. Rather, Krawitz's persona has become a caricature unrepresentative of either side of the debate, failing to produce any meaningful insights as a result. So someone who manages to be his own person and who is sort of transcending the debate, the two sides, fails to produce any meaningful insight. So somebody who is just not on either side, that's meaningless right there.
No, I think you bring up a really good point. And I just very recently posted a video that was trying to talk a little bit about the challenges that anybody who hasn't been in Bitcoin since, the year zero faces when coming into the space for the first time. And that is the extremely rigid divide between the followers of Bitcoin core developers and the followers of Bitcoin Cash Gestalt, whatever that is. And the thing that's interesting to me is that taking up a position that suggests that there is kind of a triangulated place that possibly transcends the rigidity of the either or and the kind of cognitive slippage, right, between what it means to be a user and what it means to be an investor, and the capacity to have a perspective that sees both as legitimate bets to make is really striking. It's really striking.
Right. Yeah. The both and either or dichotomy. That's a very very powerful idea. And yeah, I am definitely on the both and side, but that's meaningless. And to me, that's something that almost sounds like so obviously the opposite of what is true that a troll could have written that. But I actually think it's serious. So
Mhm.
next he says, it looks like Krawitz is attempting to reinvent the wheel through flowery language and pseudo-intellectualism for the sake of being funny, quote unquote. Just as likely, he's in love with the sound of his own voice and the role play, watching the video above in full. Oh, well, I don't need to read the rest of that, but the just the in love with the sound of his own voice and role play, like that almost sounds like an advertisement. Like here is a crazy character that you should probably pay attention to because he's funny. He's so
Right,
pseudo intellectual.
right. And I mean, I think the use of the word pseudo is always a bit of a giveaway. I mean, one has to be careful when one uses it because it's kind of a, I mean this in no disrespectful way, but it is often a kind of lazy way of just pointing out that it's not an intellectualism that you particularly like. Um, and, while I definitely can do the verbal diarrhea thing, I am an advocate also of getting straight to the point and, being simplistic in one's perspective that goes, look, as an investor, the best course of action is to be indifferent and not take sides. Okay, so we've just made a 35-second video. Uh, but yeah, I think funny is as funny does, to be honest.
And I love this part here. He says a final nonsensical gem from Krawitz is this. And here he's quoting me from an earlier video we did, and I say, I think that somebody who plays a very funny leader character and people who play along with this his funny leader character, I think that's a good way to pick a leader in Bitcoin.
Mhm.
And to me, it's sort of um like that's kind of that's kind of important there, and he just calls it a nonsensical gem. So this seems very possibly trollish or possibly pose lawish to me. And finally, right at the end, he says it's unclear whether Krawitz will turn out to be one of the greatest trolls that cryptocurrency social media has seen. Uh,
Yeah, so I have kind of two responses. One is, I may be to a certain extent showing my age, but I still kind of don't truly grasp what the hell a troll is. It seems like a very fluid kind of category of thing. Um, and then, I mean, trolling seems to me to be entirely dependent on your perspective and whether you're watching it, receiving it, or doing it. It just, and the other thing that I wanted to say
well,
that,
let me say that yeah, I mean, I would agree because the whole idea of a troll depends on figuring out what another person's intentions are who's talking to you online. So like
and who's
obviously
doing it,
you can never really know what the other person is thinking, and it could just be that somebody is just just a complete idiot, and you wasted your time talking to him because you didn't realize quick enough, or it could be someone who is trying to draw you into an extended argument and make it as pointless as possible.
and or a kind of cross wire where somebody may be just simply wanting to be in a discussion and it is coming across far more as a disagreement. I mean, I think this is a side note, and it's a very trite, obvious point to make, but the lack of actual sound, back to this idea of being in love with the sound of your own voice, it kind of highlights how much is lacking when we are left only with the written form or emojis or whatever the hell it is, right? The subtlety of being able to hear the voice and to be able to differentiate between something that's being delivered as, um, a piece of drama, which has always been a vehicle for some of the most penetrating truth. So, the drama of the Emperor of Bitcoin is saying true things, just like the Daniel who wrote articles um, on altcoins and hyper Bitcoinization is also saying true things, and they don't have to um, they don't have to not exist at the same time. But the thing that struck me about the point about a funny leader and it being a good way to choose a leader, I just sort of had a kind of double thought. One is, yeah, you can make the same case about Trump, whether or not that's turned out to be or is a good choice way of going about choosing. We are living in a time where the value of entertainment in our leaders has become really paramount to our society. And we may not like what that is saying about our society, but it is definitely saying it.
Okay, well, let me clarify that point then, because I would say that the public figures in Bitcoin, of the public figures in Bitcoin, a lot are phonies, in my opinion. So I am trying to be the biggest phony possible in order to find the dividing line. So
Okay, fair play.
I am the greatest leader who is a complete phony. That's my that is the emperor of Bitcoin character.
Got you.
So if we are in a situation where the game is to be the biggest phony, then playing the best funny characters is how you win.
Linking that into the metaphor that we've been discussing around Bitcoin and poker, right? I could join those two things up and talk about, your one's primary framework for coming into the poker game and learning its kind of macro rules is to think about the extent to which the personas that you're interacting with are real or phony.
Absolutely. And well, everybody is putting on some kind of a persona.
Yep.
So I actually kind of think it's better if you just assume that you were talking to a persona and that some kind of some kind of interaction is required before you see the real person at all. And even when we're talking about public figures, well, I should say especially, it's easier to have a persona when you're a public figure. And I think that we need to we need to be able to see who can maintain the happy funny persona amid possible downturns in the market.
Right.
And I think
I think that's a good point. I would suggest possibly that it's not possible to exist in a public space without some form of persona, even if the public space is down the road and in your grocery store. So I would also suggest, if at the risk of being pseudo-intellectual or very intellectual or just kind of abstract, what you're saying leads me to think that anybody who cultivates a persona that has an extreme characteristic to it is signaling precisely the fact that it's a persona. And in that context, actually ends up being the most authentic. Because if you're in a sea of personae, the ones that call attention to the fact that they're a personae are actually offering some kind of Alice in Wonderland-like truth.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, no, we're all mad here, and I like my supervillain persona because that makes me feel like I'm just being me,
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel the same way about my anthropologist persona, which is what my title is, I believe, at the Satoshi Vision Conference, and is definitely, thanks to you helping me find that vocabulary, I think a really good way of describing precisely the persona that I'm operating with as I come into a public space. Now I'm on a different mission, and I don't think that I'm trying to achieve anything quite as complex as what the emperor is trying to achieve, but certainly finding a way of existing in a non-private way that is authentic and sustainable and enjoyable. Yeah, it actually allows you to contribute something to whatever it is that you're trying to make or do.
Oh, so agree, but I have one quick correction. The Emperor isn't trying to do anything. It is just inherently fun to play the Emperor of Bitcoin, and there's no need for any achievement beyond that.
Well, I would argue, I agree. Thank you very much. And I would argue that that is the achievement in itself. I mean, I've shared with you off camera the fact that I preach to my small children that the meaning of life is super basic, and it is to make stuff. And that means, make laughter, make dance, make patterns, make mess, make tidy, but that the process of doing things for the purpose of doing them is, I think, really the most basic meaning of life insight that we can have. And I would also say that precisely being able to maintain any degree of humor or positivity or interest in the face of the big swings down only increases one's power or presence, because anything that allows us to get outside of panic or the kind of anxiety that's created by being confronted with the fact that you might be wrong, you might have been wrong, you might discover that you have made wrong choices, is very potent.
Oh, well, now you're just flattering me.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that, and I will share with our viewers, right, that the primary reason why we connected was because, in fact, some of the really cogent things that you were saying about how to think about forks helped me certainly in the kind of how to structure a portfolio, how to think about the space, how to orient myself. I mean, it really cut through a lot of precisely the kind of absolutist thinking that was leaving me nowhere, just round and round and round in circles.
No, listen. I have left no meaningful insights to the discussion. Sorry. So anyway, all of that stuff was supposed to be introductory, but so I thought we were going to get through all of that really quickly. So I just have two more quick points. There was one thing that I thought did deserve clarification, where he made a point that I wanted to respond to that I wasn't clear enough in the video before that he's talking about. So he quotes me as saying, someone who's a funny character is somebody who knows what they're doing more than someone who isn't a funny character. And then he says, Kraywitz applies this logic, quote unquote, to the Bitcoin community and to handle issues of cultism. While the initial concerns aired are valid, cult members always say that, Kraywitz's recommendations to be funny as a solution does not appear to logically follow from the issue. The more appropriate recommendation is simply not to trust but verify through all intellectual capabilities the individual has. So first of all, I would say you don't need to play a character if you don't want to interact with anybody. So that wasn't clear. I would say if you do want to interact with people, then you do need to play a character. Also, well, there's this gets into a different issue here. So I'm going to go back to that when we get into the intellectual stuff. So my last funny thing is he makes a joke about how the emperor has no clothes. And to me, that is like a dead giveaway for a less intelligent person or a very sophisticated troll, because I am playing, my character is like the most obvious naked emperor ever. Like I'm basically just somebody who is just sitting around like autistically acting like the emperor. So there's nothing original or insightful about making an emperor has no clothes joke. It is like something that is obviously already true to everybody. Like the point of the emperor has no clothes story is when the baby says the emperor has no clothes, then individual knowledge becomes mutual knowledge. And suddenly all of the villagers can start laughing at the emperor, whereas before they were afraid of him. But here, he doesn't seem to get that what I'm doing, it just makes him look stupid if he makes the joke.
Right, because the joke has already been revealed, right? And
right.
To a certain extent, it's another layer on top of the fact that this story and the truths that it encodes is one of the most sort of potent I don't know if it's really a meme, but it's definitely one of the most widely used descriptors from all kinds of perspectives to describe some of the things that are going on, not only in Bitcoin, but in all of the markets in general, and in culture in general. This beginning recognition that reality is the form of collective beliefs, and that once you change the collective beliefs, reality changes. Is, you know, currently, I think, very much au courant. So it's even if you extract it out of this particular conversation, it's a very potent story at the moment for people to be thinking about. One of the things that I wanted to comment on in particular is the fact that nowhere in anything that I've heard you say in any of your personae has suggested that you are not fully aware of the fact that Bitcoin operates with GitHub openness. No, that none of these discussions have anything to do with the idea that the developers working on Bitcoin Core are somehow part of a closed cabal.
Oh, sorry. So let me interrupt there and read the relevant section from the article.
Sure.
Darn, I should have been putting this up on the screen this whole time. I forgot I
Well,
could do that.
I
Let me
did.
just.
I did make sure to link it below, so anybody who's watching who wants to take a look at this article, we have.
But I'm sharing. Here's the picture of the Emperor has no clothes on the article. I should have shown this earlier while I was talking about it. But here he says, let's see. He fails to mention key counterpoints, the main one being the fact that the Bitcoin repo is open and auditable to the public. If the developers are no longer acting in the interests of the users, so there's an important issue there, users, because my problem is the investors are being ignored, okay? And there I would say he is ignoring investors again because he is talking about users. Anyway, then the users will fork off or use alternative software. Users do not need to offer blind trust. They are free to verify. But to me, what I'm saying is, why don't you verify for me? Okay, like if you are not doing what is in the interest of the investors, then what are you doing? That's kind of my point. You should be figuring out what is in the interest of the investors and then doing that. You shouldn't just do effectively random things and then just say like, well, if it turns out we're not doing the right thing, then other people can just fork off. No, you should figure out what the right thing is by figuring out what is more valuable, which is what you can do if you look at a futures market and you just say, we'll do whatever the futures market is saying, you know, we'll make Bitcoin the most valuable. Okay.
Or
So
we will certainly take it into account, right? I mean, I think one of the problems here, and this is as somebody who was not around at the year zero of, or the Big Bang of Bitcoin, because my perspective is definitely informed by not being inside of the inside of the inside, right? And one of the things that is fairly clear to me is that at some point around the Big Bang, developers, coders, people writing the software were also the people who were also the people who were by definition investing. And so as Bitcoin itself has kind of grown, the identity and the aggregate weight of those functions, okay, has become more discrete. So users are not by definition also people who can write software or code or therefore fork. I mean, I don't think someone buying lipstick or, you know, purchasing other cryptocurrencies with Bitcoin is by definition anymore able to simply fork if they don't like what's happening. And likewise, people who are now investing are not necessarily also people who are using. And as you and I have talked offline, I mean, there are interesting things to talk about in terms of how that is and can change with network capitalism. And there is a very interesting kind of debate, you know, growing at the edges of sort of traditional Wall Street forms of valuation and new emerging forms of valuation, But I think it's fair to say that we are not in a place where a user is by definition also an investor. And so the idea that the developers, software developers, should be first and foremost focused on anything else but writing the best code possible, just whatever that means, right? The thing with the least bugs, let's just start there. And then deciding what is going to be the most valuable. It seems to me that in a decentralized entity, that has to be an aggregate of both users, investors, and the people who are continuing to host it, the network, and the people who are writing the code to make all of that function. So the idea that there is a rigid perspective to take, e.g., not to pay attention to the prediction markets, or conversely, to pay only attention to the prediction markets. I mean, both of those seem to me to be kind of false intellectual places to start. They're just bogus.
Well, so to respond to that real quick, I would say that in order to succeed as an investor, you would have to successfully take into account, you know, different perspectives. You would have to actually say what is going to be the most valuable. But that is also the investor's responsibility. And the only way you can tell who is likely to know that sort of thing is to look at who is actually betting real money on the future.
Right. And why? I think
right.
that.
Yeah, well, it's hard to tell why. Ultimately, like, I would say that
precisely, which is why I think which is why the opportunity to think about how to develop more sophisticated ways to read any of the signals that are available in the noise is a key project, okay, for any group involved in Bitcoin going forward.
Well, remember, I am a signal that is not the same as either of the two sides. So I am not producing anything meaningful.
Yeah, I tell you, I mean, I think in our great books, we do have to go do the existentialists. I think we have to do Camus. I think, you know, you are an inheritor to, you know, a lot of kind of French theater of the absurd that you may or may not realize, but there is a rich tradition in the kind of absurdist comedy that you are putting forward. You know, it has always served a really important function. I mean, people teach college classes on people who have done the kind of stuff that you're doing. So I think it has a legit place.
I think the Marx Brothers are way better than Waiting for Godot.
Yeah, but The Plague and The Stranger have an awful lot to recommend them. And then Chandelou, which is, I guess, you know, like surrealist, but still, it's all of the same, you know, or the usefulness of Dadaist poetry, right? Everybody who ever took one of that boxes of magnets of random words and stuck them on their fridge is engaged in stuff that has the same roots as what Emperor of Bitcoin is doing. So, you know, it's not totally, I think this is one of the things that Mr. Dalton maybe wants to consider is that certainly when, you know, literary, creative ways of having discussions enter into what are very kind of linear forms of discussion, it can be confusing.
So I have one last well, I have one final point to make. So yeah, here we go. So somebody recently sent me this article, Johnny Freeway, and I just realized there was something he wrote in it that was relevant to this, because he talks about Cartesian skepticism versus Pyrrho skepticism. Not sure I'm saying that correctly, but Pyrrhonian skepticism. And so here is his his synopsis of Pyrrho's reasoning. Can we be certain about the nature of the argument? No. How then should we proceed without leaning one way or the other? What will be the outcome? Financial immortality. So that is, he's talking about my reasoning as if Pyrrho said it. And let's see, what did he say this? Whoever wants to be happy must consider these three questions. First, how are pragmata ethical matters, affairs, topics by nature? Secondly, what attitudes should we adopt towards them? Thirdly, what will be the outcome for those who have this attitude? And I want to contrast this with what Daniel Dalton said here. He said, the more appropriate recommendation is simply not to trust, but verify through all intellectual capabilities the individual has. So he has kind of like Cartesian skepticism, because he is trying to eliminate everything but whatever has absolute certainty. Let's see, he wrote something about Descartes in here too. Whatever, but anyway, that's what he calls Cartesian certainty, because you Cartesian skepticism, because you are trying to reach absolute certainty by being skeptical, whereas the Pyrrhonian skepticism says that all sources are potentially unreliable, so you have to weigh what you're doing based on based on things that are unreliable. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, you're looking at a kind of Newtonian versus a quantum skepticism, right? You're looking at Descartes arriving at a point where reducible down to cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This is my one irreducible conclusion, as opposed to a kind of both and. Yes, I can only ever deal with a range of probability waves. So although I may be over here in my, I don't know, 100 sigma kind of probability point, I am still aware of the fact that I am in a range of possibilities. So,
yeah. And I think it's ridiculous how people say like the Bitcoin core developers, those are the only ones you can trust, because they have impeccable reputations. But we can verify.
Honestly, to me, this is where I hear cognitive dissonance. These are the same people who will wax lyrical and convincingly and importantly, okay, on the nature of the decentralized network, on the fact that there is no there in Bitcoin, that there is no they, that so on and so forth and so on and so forth, and then start talking about the personalities of individual developers in a context which is open source software. It's absurd, right?
Well,
I mean, it's ascribing both powers and motivations to entities and individuals that don't even hold them in the first place.
Well, and also, like we just talked about, how everybody has a persona, and public figures have personas a lot more easily, right?
Right.
And we're talking about people whose persona is that they are the most trustworthy people. And to me, anybody who is making that part of his persona, even if it is not unconsciously, that is a very suspicious character right there.
Yeah, it's difficult because it's claiming an absolutism about humans that is, only really ever ascribed to the divine, right? And it's a kind of untruth to say that you are always truthful. I mean, that's kind of bogus. But I back to the main point, which is that, again, I struggle when I hear people talking about the developers themselves being fill in the blank, as opposed to talking about the awesomeness of this creation is precisely that it will do the best for itself. That there is not an exercise here in this thing is trustworthy because the people who are making the code are trustworthy. This thing is trustworthy because it is structurally designed to be trustworthy. So to a certain extent, the actual personae of the people writing the code is irrelevant. If you're really getting to the point where you're talking about investors who are not interested in the psychodrama of people and their egos, and that's the beauty of the investor, capital I, and the aggregate prediction markets, is that it really does strip away an awful lot of the stuff that has to do with hurt feelings, and really sort of focuses on outcomes regardless of who and how we got here.
Absolutely. And I sure would trust people a lot more who were completely anonymous, but who I knew had put money down on something,
right.
than than people who hadn't put money down, but who were saying, I am very trustworthy.
Right, precisely. And I mean, it goes to the, to a certain extent, I mean, I might be wrong, but it brings to mind the idea of the difference between putting your money with a mutual fund manager because you trust that person and putting your money into an index fund because you trust the math. I mean,
oh man. Yes. That's a good one. Um, so do you have any other points? We got through everything in my notes.
I am just looking down here at the
So we talked about users versus investors. I think you said you had one other big
yes,
thing, but did we already get
there,
through it?
right. I talked about it at the beginning a little bit, right, which has to do with right. It has to do with the fact that, and I had a reaction to the last part where it says gotcha, and that the natural response would be to state that this is all part of his persona, not to be taken seriously. Beauty of the position. Anyone wishing to dismantle whimsical stance will be rebutted by the classic gotcha, that's just my act, thus dismissing any form of useful discussion. And I just wondered if Mr. Dalton had ever heard of Stephen Colbert and would have made the same kind of observation with regards to, Stephen Colbert putting a viewer precisely in the position of, revealing the fact that he is not some super right-wing guy and going, hey, gotcha. Does that undermine the whole exercise precisely of producing a dramatic and exaggerated character precisely to make a critique? And
well, my argument is that I am saying things that are important,
yes.
and before, when I was writing for the Nakamoto Institute, I didn't need to do very much to get people to listen to me, because
Mm-hmm.
people were open to my ideas
Mm-hmm.
back then.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I have to do, I feel like my way of looking at things, people are trying to ignore. So I am saying them in a way that is difficult to ignore, and I am daring people to ignore me, because I think that you can't ignore my viewpoint.
Yeah, fair play. And I also, as an observer, as an anthropologist, coming and kind of immersing myself in the thing that I am also trying to observe, and as is the mandate for an anthropologist as opposed to a historian, where it's not explicit, there is an explicit mandate to keep in mind one's own biases, and to keep in mind one's own kind of beginning set of frameworks when you come in to try and observe a new. I think there's a whole range of tribes that are evolving, that are creating a new civilization. So that's kind of what my gig is in that context. I think that your persona is definitely one which is asking the people within the tribe, right, to consider what it means that you participated very much in laying down the groundwork, the ground language, the range of concepts, right, that themselves kind of established you as a form of cult leader yourself. And so the experience that those who were moved or convinced by a number of positions that you articulated, which are still true, the extent to which people have been destabilized by you moving to make new observations or take evolving perspectives, just highlights how easy it is in this space to become trapped in a way of thinking and not want to have to do any more thinking after that.
Well, I honestly don't think my thinking has evolved all that much anyway. Like I definitely, like, I would say that I didn't
Seen
think.
to evolve, let's call it that, right? Has been seen to change, right? This
Sure.
whole kind of like, oh my God, what happened to you? When in fact, it just seems to me that you are, I don't know well enough to make that kind of observation about evolved, not evolved, but it is definitely the case that people continue to say things that layer on top of what they think, and it's striking how much in the Bitcoin space people are unnerved by any kind of shift in what and how they think other people think.
As someone, well, I got really interested in cults in around 2015. Well, you know why? I actually saw I had somebody that I know who I could watch as he became a cult member on his blog. So maybe we should talk about that sometime. But I got interested in cults around then, and I wasn't expecting it to be useful. And so I was just like, well, now there's kind of a cult that grew around me. So let's see what I could do about that. And
right.
but I know that cults don't like satire and they don't like ridicule, and they think that they have power over people's opinions because that's what they have in the cult.
It's funny because at the beginning when you were pulling out some of the strands of this article that we're talking about, somewhat dismissively about an attempt to be funny, and I was thinking about Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, and the kind of observation that Aristotle's work on humor is the one that's missing. And it's just an ancient theme that systems of control or consensus that has moved into the space of control are always unhappy with humor, satire, always. Right.
Great observation there. That's funny.
I think you can find. I think it is the case that both Hitler and Mussolini shut down the comedy clubs before they started going after even the political opponents. So humor does become a very potent weapon. I think it's probably the most potent weapon that is out there.
Well, it's too bad I'm unfunny, according to this article.
You're only pseudo funny, dude. You're only pseudo funny.
But anyway, well,
for another excellent episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I will see you next time.
See you next time.